they are choosing to do so. And we're now propagating across the metaverse on our Roku channel at Pagan World TV, Magic TV if you're watching it. And you can comment there, and also you on our Facebook pages, including Pagan World TV, the Daily Spell itself, the longest running, one of the longest running newsletters of its time, and with its rich historical aspects, and also across Witch School and Pagan Noise. And you can do us a favor right now by sharing it from any of these locations to your favorite spaces. If you want to share in this conversation, our chat room is open and we will be accepting some questions out there. Not every question will be acknowledged, be unaware, because we are always on our thing. And I'm joined by the great Reverend Mary Hawk, Pagan, the programmer of our station, Pagan World, which is taking on more and more of energy, and she does a lot of programming and scheduling. So yes, and then also the Reverend Don Lewis, who needs no further acclaims, has been the co-host since we began this, and has been one of the principal writers of the Daily Spell from the day it began. And hello, Ryan. So today we're going to take on the pagan economy. We've been talking about elder care. There's been a lot of different conversations we've had around their Kickstarters and everything else. And well, let's start off with that. Let's go ahead and that. How's the Kickstarter doing?
It's doing well. It's grown a little bit today. And let me just check the tally.
Good. I'll let you do that.
At this moment, it is at $1,803 and 21 backers.
And we have what, 13 days left?
12 days to go.
Oh, good.
And I believe 79 backer slots still available.
Terrific. And that's a great thing to happen. So still a lot of room to do well. But let's take this campaign for a reason. At this point, this was material we already had.
Mm-hmm.
We put it into a new format, a better format for many people. It's a bit of a coloring book. And that's a rare item that we did with Kickstarter, the idea of make 100. And one of the things I think people don't understand is that while it's there to raise some money that we run, yes, there we go. And I think we've priced it right.
Mm-hmm.
But this, we funded it within an hour, first $500. Yes. And because of the way new programming works, and we'll talk about publishing houses and more about how things work, you're able to go ahead and once you receive the $500, know that you can bring this product out. Hmm?
Absolutely, yes.
And I believe this is the fourth project you've gone through Kickstarter. I don't think you've never had a non-successful project.
That's true.
And so,
yeah, we did the tarot cards through Kickstarter, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we see terrific things, and we love it. And Kickstarter is one of those things. Crowdfunding is one of those things our pagans believe in. So let's go ahead and talk about this one. So we're gonna give the ladies first, and I want you to tell me where you think when you hear about pagan economy, what do you think? Where's your thoughts on it?
Well, first thing that comes to mind is where do pagans spend their money when you say pagan economy? And we tend to spend it in our own stores. We tend to spend it, like you said, on Kickstarters. We are not prone to do what other religious movements do, which is necessarily buy property and tithe and build up great big buildings. And it can be hard to raise money for pagan causes. I am constantly running fundraisers to raise money for Pagan Pride Day. Hello, Mary. And so I think Kickstarters or other forms of crowdfunding are a good idea because it is something that our community will buy into. We don't, by and large, tithe. And most of us have come from a background where we don't want to be told we must tithe because we walked away from that sort of coercion.
There you go. Now we'll leave it and let Don have next.
When we talk about pagan economy, I guess because of my vintage, the thing that occurs to me
Mm-hmm.
is the pagan poverty consciousness that used to be so pervasive, and how utterly false that is when you look at the actual community. We have many, many businesses in our community. We have many artists, many craftspeople, many entertainers who are doing quite well. We are not a poor community, but particularly back in the 90s, we had this pervasive idea that we were. And I think there are still some people who suffer from that. And I think they do, in fact, suffer from it. I think if we can banish that concept once and for all, we will all be better off. The reality is we have a very dynamic economy. Like all economies, it has its pros and its cons, and its better parts and its worst parts, but we definitely have an economy. And I think we need to learn now to, one, embrace it, and two, to express it in its most positive form. One of the problems I think that we've had historically is that very often our money goes outside of our own economy. And I think that, although certainly some will always do that, I think we need to plow more money back into our economy as a community if we want to see it to thrive even more.
So one of the things I've been talking about, and I posted something I did 4 years ago, almost 4.5 years ago, and that was that there's $1 billion in the pagan market untouched. And I've said this for a while now, and I really do mean it. People go, they always ask me if I mean it or not. And I tell them, yeah, I really do mean it. I think we haven't left it. And so one of the things I see constantly is this idea of soap. Let me take something as simple as soap. And we have lots of great soaps in our community, soap makers, and they're fancy soaps and they're luxury items. And then we go home and we spend soap for everyday use. The Dove bars or the now squishy stuff, but it doesn't really matter. We all buy soap, and we have these great soap makers, but we can't seem to make it them bridge from being this fancy soap makers at the festival we buy as a almost like a tourist item, almost like like. And a lot of them never get touched. I've seen it because people keep them on the shelves for status, for something else, and they don't actually. Sometimes some people use them, but you've seen them, like they're like the fancy little bars in the bathroom, and then they have
made such a beautiful work of art.
And then they have the Dove bar or the Irish Spring bar right there in there where you wash your hands, or Dawn liquid soap, these sort of hand soaps, right? And so what we have is I really shows that one of the places where we lose the most money is that we should have a subscription service. I think subscription services work. I think they work really well for our community if the people can maintain them. And I think a soap one would work, just enough soap for your family. What do you need? Hand wash it up. They can eventually adapt it to you, and then they can be mailed to you or delivered to you. So the soap industry, I really feel like I've been on this for over 10 years, is that it's one of the undertouched markets. I see you shaking your head, Don, and Mary.
No, I totally agree. And when I've been at the various pagan pride days and other events that I go to, I've often seen people who make soaps and similar products, and they make everything that you would ask for commercially. And some of them do have people who go to them for all of their needs, but by and large, I think you're right. They are often treated as if they were a tourist item. And I think that more of us could make that our primary source and be happier for it, because they make very good products, and they often make them in an environmentally sound way, which is not the case for what you're likely to be buying in the store.
Mary, because you're a soap buyer, right?
I am, and the reason I'm shaking my head at you is you know who I get my soap from.
Go ahead and say it.
Yeah, I get my soap at Aroma Gregory's, a local botanica. which is run. They're made in shop. They make wonderful soaps. I have very sensitive skin and it doesn't dry me out and make me itchy. And I could get a cheaper bar of soap. They're about $4 a bar. I could buy a more expensive bar of soap
Mhm.
too, but they don't dry my skin out. They last longer than your average grocery store or discount store bar of soap. They smell better. Plus, you can get soap for magical intentions.
Yes, indeed.
And so,
So,
because you have that available, and for all for exposure, Aroma G's is also a sponsor of Pagan World TV.
yes,
Um,
I am.
yeah, so that's a good example of it. But if we could sell more of that soap, and if the soap makers could find out how to make a really good bar for like $2 now with inflation, I used to say $1, but $2. I think and sell them in blocks of 5 and 10 for families. I think they would do a lot better. So we see soap, lotions. I always
Mhm.
talk about candles are next. Candles out of paraffin, out of wax, and everything else. We don't have that many candle makers. We used to have a lot more candle makers. We're buying them more and more commercially. The jar candles we buy more and more commercially. But one good place, if you are a jar candle, we have the Right Reverend Aisha makes them. I know Papa G makes them, and I know a couple of others. One way you can make money is by value additive. Let me talk about this, and that is taking a jar candle, and we have a show. We've shown it on that. Maybe this weekend we'll show it on Sunday again, on how to basically wrap your own jar candles for your own saints, for your own purposes. And this is a great way for fundraising. You can do it for very little or very much, or you can do all sorts of things. We can, that from Reverend Aisha, you can get a one with a corellium on it from her,
Mm.
and they're jar candles. And you can find them usually at a dollar store. If you look at a dollar store supplier, you can buy them if you want to buy them bulk. You get them for 67 cents, 69 cents now. They're probably a little higher because they're going for $1.25. But you can just go down to your local, a lot of the local places. Now, is it great wax? No, it is the same wax we've been using for a long time, that sort of thing. But they can make their own things, value additives. So we don't have to manufacture everything, but we can also start putting some of our own energy into it. Um, and so that's another way to make money. But people are asking me. So the particular question that came to me is that how can we pay clergy? How can we have a paid clergy to carry out a lot of the functions? Now, Mary, let me go ahead and start with you. Don and I have a different situation that we deal with because this is our life, right? I don't want to go into incense. I am so sick of incense in the world. Everybody goes into incense. Hmm? And I like it and all, but there's a limited market for incense. Um, thank you, Ryan. All right. But the idea of pagan clergy, paying pagan clergy, and the idea of being supported. And you do a lot of volunteer work. I mean, a tremendous amount of work.
I do.
It's an incredible amount of work, and you take care and counsel people. You work in the prison ministry. This is on top of your 45-hour a week job, sometimes worse, helping America, helping America through proper customer service, and uh, and then also being Pagan World programmer and things of that nature. So you have a tremendous amount of work. And like yourself, you said I would love to be able to do the work of Pagan World TV and the counseling and everything else there, but you can't because there's no support. So can you talk to that? The idea of a paid pagan clergy, and is it worth doing? And that sort of thing.
Would it be worth doing? It absolutely would be worth doing. I am often spread very thin between what I'm called to do and what I need to do to pay the bills.
Hmm.
So, between Pagan Pride Day, Pagan World, and prison ministry, it does all keep me very, very busy. I absolutely love it. I'll add that. And I wouldn't change a thing. I would love to be able to focus all my time on what I do as a priestess. But unless I am able to make a reasonable amount of money at it, I can't.
Mm-mm.
This is also why I play Powerball. So I believe my work is of value to the community, and it would be nice to be able to focus more time on it. I have a long list of things I want to do for Pagan World that haven't gotten done yet because I don't have the time to. And the same for prison ministry, and um, as well as for Pagan Pride Day, because there's only so much that can get done at any given time.
And this is epidemic in our community. I hear this over and over again. Now, Don, you get a lot of Corellians. You have probably one of the largest volunteer bases in the pagan world in a lot of ways. I really think you do.
No, I would have to agree with that. Yes.
And to remind people how large that is, you have ordained ministers now in 53 countries. I believe you have at least 53 countries and ordained minister. And I think you have ordained churches, like church recognized, I think in 8 countries right now.
I believe so. Yes, I'd have to actually consult the records to be exactly certain, but that's more or less correct.
Across the United States, and hundreds of groups. So, and all of this has been done primarily through volunteerism.
No, almost entirely,
including yourself,
through volunteer efforts, including myself. There have been brief exceptions, but for the most part, entirely volunteer.
Now we pay our programmer, even that's semi-volunteer. We always pay for our programmer, because that's the one thing people don't want to volunteer their time for.
Well, it's important to have a good programmer, especially when the backbone of your operation is online. But you know what? To speak to what Mary was saying, one of the problems that the wider pagan community has often had is that what keeps it going are these people volunteering very large amounts of time until they can't. Until they burn out, because they're simultaneously running all these things and earning a living and living their life, until their health gives out, until they for whatever reason just can't do it anymore, and then often there's no one to take it over. And that actually is probably, I think, the biggest reason why moving toward more of a paid clergy is a good idea, because many of these organizations do rely on not just volunteer effort, but vast amounts of volunteer effort. However, it's easier to say it than it is to do it.
Now, let's go ahead and talk about, for us, how we finally did it. And so we do it through a subscription. So pagans will accept subscription payments. We use a combination of subscription payments, and early on, a single one-time payment that was large enough to cover your expenses for years, because we were knocking down all the costs, because we had only programmers and only people working as a programmers being paid. And in the early programmer, it was just paying living expenses. It wasn't that. It was just making sure that our good friend Lisa had enough money in her pocket to feed herself and to house herself.
Yes.
And everything else. I mean, we're very, very lucky.
We were very fortunate. We have attracted wonderful people. And by and large, that's true for the community, that there are such wonderful people willing to give all these volunteer hours, and that's a wonderful thing. But it doesn't necessarily always meet everything that's needed.
Right. Well, that's
we've been fortunate that we have, for the most part, been able to meet everything that's needed. When it is needed, but that isn't always true for local communities.
So one of the things I want people to think about is, how can they build themselves a subscription service for their church, for their group, for their members. I mean, if you have them on a subscription service, they're more likely to pay it. You don't have to chase them out. You can do very little with it, make their dues available to it. There are groups. There is nothing wrong if you want to be a full-fledged member of a group to charge $20 or $25. If they want to give that a month, but let the subscription service be the way that you collect. It's not necessarily a tithe, but it is a donation. So there are people who will give tithe-like donations.
Yes, there are.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who will, without a subscription, give monthly amounts of money.
Right.
Because they understand what's happening and that the support is needed. But I think a subscription is a good way to go, and that is a very different thing from a tithe. A tithe is a percentage of the person's income. A donation is not. It's a specific requested donation.
And through that method of small payments, either by subscription or by even just a one-time payment of lifetime memberships, which is out there right now. You want a lifetime membership, it's $299. Believe me, it's a bargain.
It is.
And that helps out too, because that gives us some of the cash up front so we can do some of the repair work.
And if you would like one of those, you can get it at witchschool.com/subscriptions.
Absolutely. So Mary, so what do you think about what we're saying?
Well, it certainly makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. In terms of asking people for subscriptions.
And so I think that's one of the things that people in the pagan community really does like. And I think that they're willing to respond. And you see it with Patreon. Patreon is nothing but a subscription service. Byron Ballard has one. I think Orion Firefox one. A lot of the major leadership is now building. Oberon Zell has one. Don and I do not, because we basically are working through the witch school system. And would rather, a lot of things like that. So we're not having a separate Patreon. You can but people have donate to our care. I mean, somebody gave. You can do that through the witch school system. And we can talk, maybe not tonight we'll talk about it. Maybe we will. We'll see how much time we've got. But they can, do it. So the Patreon right now is a way of doing it. And that's crowdfunding. We've had friends. I'm not going to talk about it right now, but we just had a friend was able to fix part of their lives because they want, and now they're living amazing, better, higher life. And all they had to do was agree out there. Thank you, Kathy Dragoni. She just said my lifetime membership, one of the best purchases ever. I think so. Was able to fund their way into a better life because they had to take care of something. A lot of people want to talk about this sort of care, like GoFundMe and startup funding and crowdfunding of some of what we need as begging. They want to see it in the negative. Or why do we need that? No, I agree. Some of it why do we need medical care? Why do we need all that? I'm not going to argue that today. But for optional things or things that would make our lives better, why not ask? I'm tired of the idea that we're not allowed to ask. Now, Mary, you are somebody who doesn't ask enough. I will out Mary here. She doesn't ask for help from us, including finances, and she's paid thousands of dollars out, and like every other pagan pride leader I know have paid thousands of dollars that they're never going to be reimbursed for their event and what they do. So yes, as somebody that has spent thousands of your own personal dollars to help make sure these events happen, and which means the merchants do it, and the amount of money the merchants give them is not nearly enough to cover it. So let's talk about that. I mean, you're not just not receiving money; you're spending your own money to make these things happen.
I have had to do that. We're reevaluating how we're going to work it this year, but yes, we had a shortfall that had to be made up this year. That doesn't often happen, but this year we did.
And you don't see the hidden expenses. I mean, like their personal gas. They don't just.
I do not usually ask for reimbursement on gas.
No, nothing. You don't get reimbursed for a lot of things.
I could start adding up printer paper and printer ink
and everybody, and this is the same thing happening throughout the community. All the pagan pride leaders of that, none of them are really making anything. So that sort of thing, because they're afraid to ask. So, and talking about another person who is also afraid to ask. Hi, Don.
Hello.
So you've gotten better about asking through COVID. I think the biggest change of you is you've gone pre-COVID. You would never really ask.
Mhm.
Mhm. You just whatever spirit gave me, whatever spirit performs, I will do. Hmm?
That tended to be my philosophy. Yes.
You only ask under desperate need. Hmm?
Yes.
And
Which
now
did
you're
happen from time to time.
well, sure, but it took desperate need for you to ask for help.
Mhm.
And now you're settled in and you're doing that, and you're not paid clergy, but the church does help you with some of your expenses, and your church members make sure you have a roof over your head,
Yeah.
blessed Lord and things of that nature, because you built a great structure that allows them to help you, and it actually makes sense.
Mhm.
And it's not a great distance, between the subscriptions and donations and auctions that happen. You're able to spend time, and now you've learned to ask. You've just did a 4-book set. You
Yeah.
just finished revamping the entire. Let's be honest, you just entirely revamped the entire degree program. That'll soon,
Yes. Yeah. Took a whole year, or maybe a little more.
But let's talk about what you built, and this is a model for everybody. It's called zero manufacturing. I am going to have a
Mhm.
class on this. I'm hearing you guys, but you are able to start your own publishing house. You're able to take your books back from Llewellyn.
Mhm.
Either they gave them to you, you're requesting them back, right? And you
Mhm.
got all your books back, all the rights to them. You've now made a 3rd edition,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because Llewellyn was a 2nd edition.
Yes, it was.
Um, and now this is the 3rd edition, and you brought about both hardcovers and paperbacks.
Mhm.
Can you talk about
Yeah.
that process? And I think anybody can do it. I think there are a number of companies that are beginning to do it.
When you ask about the process of revising the books,
Mm-hmm.
um, really was a matter of bringing them into alignment with the present day, because some of these had been written 20 years ago or more, and things have changed. And as I was going through them, I was finding references to the internet that were a generation out of date. Um, and then the other thing is there were things that I didn't think of when I was writing them. Again, in some cases, 20 years ago, that have become very clear since. So I was able to put those in, things that people didn't necessarily understand, that needed maybe to be phrased a little differently. And some of our teachings have changed in 20 years. So from that aspect, that the process was one of taking the material that was there, which is good material, but adapting it to the changes which have occurred. And there have been also many social changes. Um, and certainly the milieu of the community is not what it was at that time. It has changed and grown as well. But in terms of the physicality of it, it's a world away from what publishing used to be. Back in the 80s, I was involved in the Pagan Press, and we would type our magazine on a typewriter and paste it together on typing paper with Scotch tape or rubber cement, and add in our hand-drawn photo or our hand-drawn pictures. And occasionally we might do photos using there was a special screen that could be used, a dot matrix that could make them printable at this level. And then Xerox them for the most part. Today, it's a very different thing. And of course, you had to have the money up front to do those things. Today, I have published all of these through Amazon, and you upload the manuscript. You don't need any upfront money, and it's just a matter of making it, and then it's a matter of selling it and how long it takes to receive the copies. It is a zero upfront investment, and that means it's something anyone could do. And that is a world away from the publishing of yesteryear. There was a time you went to big companies because they were the only ones who could reasonably print books. I mean, it was possible to have a private printing of a book, and people sometimes did, but very expensive. And also the big companies were the only ones who could really effectively distribute books. But these things are not true now. Now you can print it yourself without an upfront expense, and because of social media, you can also publicize it without necessarily requiring a third party. And that really does change the nature of things.
So let's talk about even, so that is a very important. Even tarot cards. Let's talk about
Hmm.
tarot cards. Same thing. It's a little different. It's a little bit more standardized manufacturing, but you brought up the Tarot of Hecate.
Hmm.
And we did a Kickstarter for that. And we'll have to do another one for the next reason, for reasons that are about development. But why don't you go
Yeah.
ahead and talk about that as well?
Well,
Mm-hmm.
you can't really do that through Amazon. It's a little different. You do have to have an upfront cost for that, because you still have to use a company, because printing cards is a specialized thing, more so than printing a book now. I don't know how long that will still stay the case, but it certainly is now. So we found a good company to use with decent prices. Um, and even as little as 10 years ago, that was not available. This sort of thing could not be done then. There were only a very few companies that specialized in cards, and you had to do a large run to get them. When we first brought out the Tarot of Hecate as a card deck a number of years ago, we were fortunate that that we knew someone who owned a company that could print cards and was willing to do a small run. But that was very unusual, and it was a lucky circumstance. Now, however, you can have as few as one deck made, although you'll pay well for it. But you can do that now. And there are numerous companies actually that will do it of various quality. And that totally revolutionizes tarot cards versus what they were, because you absolutely could not. Back in the 80s, when I was first looking at getting the Tarot of Hecate published as a black and white deck, getting cards done was very difficult, which is why it never happened, but also why it was black and white, because financially that was far more doable than a full color deck. I think it was the Tarot of the Moon. Tarot of the Moon that started that did that also. They started as a black and white deck, and then after a few years they were able to bring out a color deck because the upfront cost was so high. They had to build up to it. And although with cards you still have an upfront cost, it's nothing compared to what it was. The creation of books and cards and so forth has been greatly democratized in the modern world. It is much more available to people who don't necessarily have a big company behind them.
And so the Tarot of Hecate, the whole set of the Infinite Tarot, will eventually have its own new second Kickstarter campaign,
Yes.
probably about $20,000, because it's still expensive. But it used to be $50,000 investment to do a tarot deck. You had to get at least 1,000, 2,000 decks of cards. So. But the reason why the next one is going to be out there is that we want, we built a deck, it's a very old deck, and then we got it manufactured, and we've had a couple little manufacturings of it. And now we want to get commercial boxes for them and the UPC codes so that they can be sold to the larger market.
Yes.
And now we're going to do the next campaign for the stores, for everybody else. And we're going to ask for the money from the people who want to sell them and resell them up front. Through the sort of zero manufacturing pre-capitalization. So you can do a book for free. You can do tarot cards. If you're willing to sell a deck for $100, like you probably can get one deck for like $100, depending on what it is. It goes down drastically after that, and things of that nature. And so, and Mary here has actually got a collectible card that she is the Queen of Swords in the Infinite Tarot.
I do.
Isn't it cool how we have all our props right at hand?
Mm-hmm.
It is.
And there we are.
Here I am.
So I'm constantly hearing people, so paid clergy who have programs have a couple of different systems. They can come and find ways to teach. They can teach
Mhm.
online. Now the Zoom classes have moved in. I remember fighting over that Zoom class and all that in 2019. You guys would not have anything to do with it. We've had to fight tooth and nail. Oh, 2020 comes along. Okay, we have to do it. We helped. Now in 2023, I am seeing a master class by a woman who's charging $500 for the course online.
Yeah.
And everybody's going online. And it reminds me of the same sort of technological change we went through phones when the 900 numbers came out. Nobody can reach you over the telephone. No, you have to come in and meet me personally. Remember that. And
Yeah.
now the majority, by far, people prefer it and have the majority of their phone by phone for a long time, and now by Zoom.
Yes.
So you have that ability, and Zoom is very inexpensive. You can get it 40 minutes or for like $20 a month. You can get an account, and you can then start charging classes. All the tools of fixing these problems are right there. I think people just have to understand what it is they want to do. So let's talk about where Mary's pretty good at, and I'm less so because I have a different philosophy. We'll ask Don about it. But Mary, can you talk about the sensibilities of a budget? Because I noticed that before you get started, you put together budgets.
Yes,
You
I
know,
do.
can you talk about why people should stop just dreaming it into existence? And once they dream it into existence, why should they create a budget? Why should they start to really deal with the budget? Because we're already talking about you can make all this stuff, you can do things. But I think people badly spend. After they get the money they think they need, they badly spend. So why should they have a budget?
Well, and if you don't like the word budget, say spending plan. Number one,
Okay.
if you feel like, because a lot of times people associate budget with the idea of lack. We just have a little bit of money, so we have to budget it out carefully. So let's get rid of budget and say spending plan. But
Mm-hmm.
what you do have to do is take a look at what your expenses are,
Mm-hmm.
what your income is, and when your expenses are due. And plan for how your money is coming in versus when you have to make payments. Because where I think a lot of times people get in trouble is they know that on paper they should have enough money to cover their expenses, but what they're not looking at is how the cash flow works. If you have a large payment due on the 15th of the month, then you have to be sure there's enough cash in the bank to cover it on the 15th of the month. So you have to plan for that expense and not allow the money to get away from you on other expenses that could be pushed out further in the month.
And there you go. So that's an essential part of it. And let me talk about the next piece I think that is really super important. So they say pagans don't like to tithe. And you know what they don't like about tithing? Because they don't know where the money's going to go to. Nobody does. And so
Yeah.
that's a big part of it. You don't know what that money's going to, or you don't have any say in it. And pagans want more say. So the idea of crowdfunding, as we've been talking about, direct donations to individual groups that we can talk about, and groups that can show you their spending plan. That says, okay, this is what we need, right? And when we do our campaign for Pagan World TV next month, we're going to start it. We're working on it. we're going to explain a little bit of where we need the money. We're going to show you up front. We're going to talk to you about it. And I think people are much more okay making direct donations. I don't think we're not donating people. So I do think that the problem is the idea of tithe and the unaccountability of it all.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So the more people can show or explain where the money goes. I mean, in the Correllian tradition, we have a great flow of the money, and people are really content, and they can see where it is, and we're, you know, the constant is. And the witch school began a process that allowed us to do events like Pagan Prides and St. Louis Pagan Picnic, and also started Pagan Tonight Radio and Magic TV, and Pagan World got a jump from witch school, and it's working its way to be more independent. And we need to be, you know, because we want to be more and more independent. But this all came from a base core that still exists today of subscription services for good training and great classes and good and even better community. Right. And now, right now, you could take a class for how to create a book, speak your own book.
Yes.
There's a whole course on that. We've just added a new druid for people who don't even cost anything, a new druid class. So we have that on there. And that this through people finding value and able to sponsor things or to buy, you know, buy memberships, we've been able to grow a global, one of the largest Wiccan churches in history, not just period, but in history. And that was one thing. And we were able to start continuing to try to educate and give out free classes and all of it, through that methodology. Plus, combined with product sales, because we are a market religion, and now it's better and easier than ever. And a charity of individuals, we were able to do things. So, having said all that, I think pagans love projects. So we saw it with Kickstarter. They did a thing called Witch Starter, and what they did is they put it out to the entire world. We're going to do magical thinking, divination. We're going to give them a special sponsorship, right? And I will be embarrassed that I didn't take it. You know, I was telling everybody, and I'm embarrassed to say that I let it go past me, even though I was Chicken Little. Hey, please do this. They had over 300 projects join that were 77% effective. Remember, most campaigns are 35 to 40% effective. 77% effective, and they raised a total of $6.5 million over that campaign. Means a lot of these campaigns, some got a lot of money, and some of them, and tarot cards was the biggest one by this new easiness of it. And some of them were smaller, but the average was like, you know, over $20,000 earnings.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a mainstream company, Kickstarter, creating a sub program for magic, divination, everything in any of the categories. And they ended up raising $6.5 million over approximately 260 projects that were completed. When people say there's no money out there, that's not true. They just want to know where the money's going to. So the more you can define where you're going to spend your dollars, even if you can say, we're going to hire paid clergy, and you know they're going to go out to hospitals, they're going to go out to, if they know where the money is going. Wild Hunt does this. They put out an annual budget to explain where their money is going. The more you can explain where the money is going to, or give them a good sense of it, then they will donate. They don't like tithing, but they do like donating. And everybody says, oh, they don't have donations. If they're not donating to you, they either don't trust you. And let's go ahead and talk to that. What about the idea of trust? What do we need to do to, you put out pre-orders all the time, Don. So things that can take up to months to get to them.
Yes, that's true. I can't hear you.
Oh, my thing turned off, my microphone. And I said, Mary is a very good buyer of those things. And you do pre-orders all the time. You do even projects like for the books and the publishing, even months ahead of time.
Yes, sometimes many months.
And sometimes, not so much. And you have some of that out now. And then you perform on it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that trust, especially building the Correllian publishing? Utilizing this in your own manufacturing and doing pre-orders, not just crowdfunding, but pre-orders.
Well, I think trust is a major issue um, in the pagan economy. But speaking for Corellian publishing, I think that we have demonstrated that we follow through. And we've done it over the course of a long period of time, even before Corellian publishing as such, but through the tradition and the school. I mean, we've been here, we've shown that yes, we will follow through. And therefore people can be trusting enough to wait for a pre-order for a period of many months because they've seen them come through before. They have every reason to believe they'll come through now. I think it would be harder to do that without that background. Depending on, it would be harder to do it that way. I think you'd have to build up a few where you had a very specific wait time for fulfilling the orders. Because on some of our pre-orders, it's been, it'll be approximately October or whatever it is. And maybe it does end up to October, maybe it doesn't. It's dependent on the individual project. But people have enough experience to know they will get it, and so they're patient. Um, I think that to some extent is something you build up by interacting with people over time, and that they see that that the follow through is there.
Thank you. And for Mary, for you've sold out your Pagan Pride this year, and you've done that
Yes, we
before.
did. Yes, we
How
have.
can you talk about that? Because that's also a trust factor, isn't it?
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Our vendors trust us enough that in January and February, they are sending in their vendor fees, trusting us that we will have a good event for them because we have built a track record. Lucy and I have been co-coordinators since 2011. So they trust that we are going to put on an event that will attract a large crowd, almost 1,500 this year. And so I'm actually getting emails, messages, a phone call. You haven't opened vending yet. It's January. What's up?
And that's great. I mean,
Right. I mean,
and that's what we need in our community. I mean, that's kind of what we do. And there's other Pagan Pride events, and that we do have all these pools of trust that we do trust people in. I'm going to answer some of the questions that they got out. Kathy mentioned that all things trans well into Zoom, what we were talking about earlier, and they like in person. I think there's some real hybrid ideas over that. Zoom does open up opportunities that would not otherwise be available. I think that's very, very true. And Ryan mentions you can sponsor or get sponsor peoples. And yes, you can. You can sponsor these shows. You can become a sponsor of this show. We could actually run commercials here. Become a sponsor at Pagan World TV. Yes, you can. And I believe in sponsorships. So we got that. So let me go into so building trust is it supplying on the ideas of it. You've got a lot of great ideas. Never say, oh, this is so hard. Yes. Let's talk about the last bugger. When you do talk about product, one of the biggest things that pagans destroy themselves on, I won't even mention it. It can take is that the idea of delivery. The hardest part where trust fails is delivery. Shipping is really hard. Getting the product is hard. You misjudge it. You don't do it. I ordered one time almost $400 worth of creams and lotions because people asked, and they gave me the 400 creams and lotions. They did a great job. And I go, okay, I've got this sold. Can you do another 400? No, they spent so much of the money that they got to get the equipment and everything to make the order. They didn't have enough money to make another order. So I had to prepay them on the next one. And then there was never a third order because they failed because they couldn't get that capital in the past. So I do think that that's some of the difficulty. Now being able to pre-order, use the internet to create some of this, you have a better opportunity. You can be more honest about your product. You can be more honest about that. So you have a lot of capabilities. So I think it's almost top of the hour. We're gonna bring our last question into place. Um, so I believe that a pagan clergy is not to be paid can be absolutely done, and we could have it really put together within a very short period of time, within a couple of years. You know,
Mhm.
we overestimate what we can do a year, underestimate what we can do a decade. And my gosh, we've shown that over and over again. And look at what we're capable of doing in 3 decades. We've gone from being a very small practice to being global, worldwide, enabled now to go to the Parliament of World Religions in large numbers. That's another a lot of the trilogy being able to do so. Um, yeah, under promise, over deliver. We try to do that a lot every day, but I think the community could be. So, what are your thoughts on? And I'm going to go with you first, Mary, and then Don. What are your thoughts about the idea of pagan clergy from the point of view? Is it, do you think communities really want pagan clergy?
Well, I am frequently getting uh, requests. Do I know anybody who can drive to the middle of nowhere and do a wedding, do a funeral at the drop of the hat? And of course, due to my commitments, I can't. And there's a loose network of people who refer around, and it frequently, yes, I think the need is there for some people who could be more available. I got a message a little while ago from someone that I counsel about upset about something that, um, there is a real need for people who could do pagan clergy work because
Okay.
I do see requests for it all the time.
So that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit more and we're going to get more into. I don't think this conversation ends right here, but it's tonight. So, Don, your thoughts?
Well, I don't think it's a one size fits all answer, but I certainly think there are a number of places in the community where there would be a benefit to being able to pay the people who are doing the things. I don't know if that's every individual. It depends what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It depends what the need is. People who are doing weddings and funerals and so forth, there is a growing need for that, and um, I certainly think that they should be paid for that. I generally expect to be if I do those things, and I have a number of times over the years, and I encourage our Corellian clergy who do marriages and funerals and so forth to ask for a reasonable donation in exchange. I think if you're running an organization or a part of an organization, it's certainly would be desirable to be able to pay those positions because that ensures that they can continue. Also ensures that if the person doing all the work gets tired and doesn't want to do it anymore, someone else could be brought in who maybe isn't willing to volunteer as much but is able to do as much. Um, so I think that for the people who are really running things, who are running the pagan prides, who are running particularly active temples, who are running community organizations, I think it would be beneficial to move to a place where they are receiving compensation for what they're doing. I think that it also brings with it its own problems that need to be looked at as well. I think that it also represents a distinct change in the way things work within the community, which um, isn't necessarily bad, but would constitute a change. I think some of the dysfunctionality that has characterized certain pagan communities would not really be as possible under that circumstance. Because the other thing is, if when people are being paid, they also are more accountable for what they do or do not do.
Hmm.
True.
And so, and let me offer one thing. And so we're talking about paid pagan clergy. Everybody is probably thinking as a salary. But there's a lot of benefits inside the 501c3 system that the big churches use of providing non-taxable and direct money to people through the term called stipends and honorariums. So it may not be that you're paying your clergy, but you are paying that internet fee that they're spending. You are spending the amount of money that they're spending for gas to travel around. Making payments, helping them making part of the car payments that they're using up the wear and tear of it, paying their registrations to go to festivals. These are things that the church are very much within the church's ability to pay, even a housing allowance.
Mhm.
So these are the ways of the ways to do it. So if you don't want to think about it being paid pagan clergy or compensated pagan clergy, how about pagan clergy to get some of their expenses, covered?
Mhm.
And this is a way to do it without having to be so embossed in sort of legalisms. With a good accountant and the way the laws work, there's very little paperwork compared to, say, a corporation. And
The
so
churches have a sweet deal.
they do. And I don't think we use that enough. And you're allowed to go ahead and receive compensation in these different forms that never affect your main salary, never affect your income. And this isn't true of people on Social Security.
Mhm.
That sort of thing. We could help the elder care by giving them stipends if we had a central stipend fund. So we're talking about there's ways to make money. There's ways to earn money. We can crowdfund money. We've talked about other things. We're going to talk about a lot more about this because I think it's now time for us to move. We talked about zero manufacturing, and we haven't even gotten into 3D printing. We haven't got into how to build our use Etsy. We haven't even got into the ways of the other ways you can fund this. But I think what I think Mary made out a good point. I think people need to know their budget, their spending plan. Let's not call it a budget. Let's call it a spending plan.
Spending.
And I think that's a great place for people to start. If they know what they want to spend on, then there's all sorts of mechanisms to get that money. And the only thing I will tell you, don't start a store. Please do anything but start a store. Now you're laughing.
That's because I've seen the same things you've seen.
Yeah, and we've tried stores ourselves, and I'm not saying. And if you're a good trained retail person, we have a few in our community. I'm not saying if you have training and you have the depths of pockets and you know how to sell and you love selling, please go ahead and open a retail store.
Yeah, but not just because you think it would be fun.
Or you think it would help the
Because
community.
it's not fun.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Aroma G's, like you said, is a beautiful shop. I've seen beautiful shops. The Occult Bookstore is a beautiful shop. The Occult Society. When we see Augustine's spiritual site on the south side of Chicago for 40 years. Oh my gosh. And if you go in that store, it's like full of it. And so you have people who can do a really good job with stores and people who've spent years in retail. I'm not telling you guys not to do it. But if you are an amateur who's never done any retail, go work in a retail store for at least a year, a metaphysical store, before you even do this. I swear, this is probably one of the areas we've spent more money and lost more money than anywhere else out there in the community.
A lot of times
Mhm.
people have opened stores where they might just as easily have simply poured the money down the toilet
And
because
had
they
less
didn't know what they were doing.
and less emotional and mental trauma.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Mary, I'll give you the last word tonight. Do you have anything you want to say?
Well, this is certainly something we need to keep discussing as a community and looking at how we want to work our pagan economy.
And the Pagan World Project right here for that. So,
Yes,
Don,
we are.
close in prayer today.
Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to have prosperity in our lives and in our emotions. Prosperity in material ways, prosperity in immaterial ways. to help us to keep our balance as we go forward, and to help us as a community to prosper and to thrive, and as individuals to thrive in our lives. Beloved ones, beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for your aid. May the blessing be upon you now and always. So mote it be.
So let it be.